Good morning. I'd like to welcome everyone to State Game Lands 93 and thank you for being here today as the Pennsylvania Game Commission rededicates this special area to honor the heroic passengers and crew members of United Airlines Flight 93 in conjunction with the 20th anniversary of the attacks on September 11th, 2001. My name is Seth Mazuris, and I am the Pennsylvania Game Commission's Information and Education Supervisor for the Southwest region. Before we begin, I would like to take a moment and ask everyone to join me to bow their heads for a brief moment of silence to honor the 13 members of the armed forces who recently paid the ultimate sacrifice defending our country in Afghanistan. Thank you. Today we remember all the lives lost on that tragic day of September 11th, 2001. We are honored and humbled to join together and honor the amazing passengers and crew members of Flight 93. The Pennsylvania Game Commission is privileged to rededicate State Game Lands 93 today. Before we continue, we have some special guests we would like to take a moment to recognize. First, Jerry and Lori Guadagno, the father and sister of Richard Guadagno, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologist and law enforcement officer and passenger of United Flight 93. They are accompanied today by several members of Richard's family, friends, and loved ones. Second, Daniel Freed, the Richard J. Guadagno Student Conservation Association Conservation Fellow for the Flight 93 National Memorial. State Senator Pat Stefano, representing the 32nd District. Pennsylvania Board of Game Commissioners President Stan Knick, Vice President Michael Mitrick, and Commissioners Tim Layton, Dennis Fredericks, Scott Foradora, and Kristen Schnepp-Geiger. Last but not least, Pennsylvania Game Commission Executive Director Brian Burhans. To begin the ceremony, the Pennsylvania Game Commission Ceremonial Unit will be posting our nation's colors. At this time, we ask those who are able to please rise and remain standing for the posting of the colors, followed by the singing of the national anthem and the Pledge of Allegiance led by State Game Warden Matthew Kramer. After the national anthem, please remain standing for a prayer that will be led by retired State Game Warden and current pastor Jack Lucas.
Detail. Halt. Post, colors. Post. Ready. Two. Present. Arms.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Order. Arms. Ready. Cut. Right. Face. Forward. March.
You may be seated. On September 11th, 2001, that day changed the course of American history. We all remember the chaos, we remember the confusion, the destruction, the heartbreak, and yet we also remember a great day when everybody of all the heroism that came forth across this great land. And yet to be remembered, and at a time that we learned, despite all the suffering and despite all the loss, that we've learned how God had truly remained faithful through those days. In the smoke and the debris, he still arose throughout the country. Join me in prayer if you would. Lord, we gathered today on this solemn day to remember yet 2 decades of tragedy that struck this great country. And as we remember the loss, and those that are here that have family members that perished before us, those that have known others that have sacrificed ultimately great so that we can enjoy the freedoms that we endure. Lord, we gather here today on this land, a small piece of your land. Lord, as we begin to make a tribute to this land and a memorial, from this point forward that the generations and the decades can come and show honor and respect to those that have gone before us. But Lord, with our memory, it is our honor that we give our own strength to help the hurting. Lord, through our own strength that we make sacrifices to those around us. And Lord, with our faith, we begin to share what you brought to us, your Son, Jesus Christ, to have eternity with him one day. I pray for these ceremonies and those that are gathered here, Lord, those that tomorrow across the streets, as many will be traveling many great miles, that you give them safe travel mercies. But Lord, we honor you and show you the respect for those that have given the ultimate sacrifice for us. We pray this too in your holy, most precious name. Amen.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you, Jack. Today we gather to honor and remember the passengers and crew members of United Flight 93 who sacrificed their own lives to save countless others that day. These special people will always be remembered as heroes. This morning, as we reflect on the lives of those 40 passengers and crew members, I welcome Jason Farbaugh, Southwest Region Director for the Pennsylvania Game Commission, to lead the reading of their names.
Thank you. Christian Adams. Lorraine G. Bay. Todd M. Beamer. Alan Anthony Bevan. Mark Bingham. Deora Francis Bodley. Sandy Waugh Bradshaw. Marion R. Britton. Thomas E. Burnett, Jr. William Joseph Cashman.
Georgine Rose Corrigan. Patricia Cushing. Captain Jason M. Dahl. Joseph DeLuca. Patrick Joseph Driscoll. Edward Porter Felt. Jane C. Folger. Colleen L. Frazier. Andrew Sonny Garcia. Jeremy Logan Glick.
Kristen Osterholm White Gold. Lauren Catuzzi Grancolas, an unborn child. Wanda Anita Green. Donald Freeman Green. Linda Grunland. Richard J. Guadagno. First Officer Leroy Homer. Toshiya Kuga. Cece Ross Lyles. Hilda Marson.
Waleska Martinez. Nicole Carol Miller. Louis J. Nackey II. Donald Arthur Peterson. Gene Hoadley Peterson. Mark David Rothenberg. Christine Ann Snyder, John Talagnani, Honor Elizabeth Wainio, Deborah Jacobs Welsh. At this time, we would like to ask everyone to please observe a moment of silence as we conclude this moment of remembrance. Thank you, Deputy State Game Warden Jeff Steen, for the playing of the Amazing Grace. For several years, the Guadagno family has funded the Richard J. Guadagno Student Conservation Association Conservation Fellowship. 2 fellowships exist, one at the Humboldt Bay National Wildlife Refuge and the other at the Flight 93 National Memorial. It is a privilege to introduce next Daniel Freed, the active J. Richard Guadagno Conservation Fellow for the Flight 93 Memorial.
Good morning. Like was just mentioned, my name is Daniel Freed, and I am the Richard J. Guadagno Fellow at Flight 93 National Memorial. When I was asked to make these remarks, I admit I had a really difficult time writing them at first for 2 reasons. One, it's hard to put into words what an honor it is to be able to stand in front of you today and talk about the life of Richard Guadagno. And 2, it's very hard to sum up his life in less than 5 minutes, but I'm going to do my very best at that. I also have to admit that when I began this internship, I didn't know who Richard Guadagno was, other than that he was a passenger on board Flight 93. But over the past 5 or so months, I have learned that, in fact, he was many things: a biologist, a gardener, cook, musician, environmentalist, brother, and son. Richard was all of these things and many more during his life, but I'd like to add one more thing that he certainly has become after his lifetime, and that is an inspiration. Richard lived his life with a great deal of passion, and that inspires me every day to live my life with all the sense of wonderment and desire to learn about the world around him that he did. When Richard discovered an interest, he dedicated himself to it 110%. He had far too many hobbies for me to list to you today, but I'll try to give you a sense of his passions with one word, and that's tomatoes. An avid gardener, Richard spent an entire summer nurturing dozens of tomato plants. And when his plants gave fruit, that allowed another one of his passions to come forward. He was a good Italian man, and he loved to cook, and he loved to eat. And friends said that he would invite 3 or 4 people over to his house for a dinner, and there would be enough food for over a dozen people, but he made sure that none of that ever went to waste. He planted so many tomatoes that summer that even he couldn't eat all of them. So soon his friends would come home from weekend trips and start discovering buckets of tomatoes on their porches, because Richard loved to share his fruit with them. But perhaps Richard's greatest passion was his love of the outdoors and of the environment. That's what he dedicated his work and his life to. Over a 17-year career in the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, Richard served at wildlife refuges on both coasts. His final position as manager of Humboldt Bay National Wildlife Refuge in Northern California allowed him to make an impact that is still felt to this day. In early 2000, Humboldt Bay was badly polluted, understaffed, and had a dilapidated visitor center. Thankfully for the park, it was getting a man who was passionate about making a change and committed to seeing his plan through. Richard envisioned Humboldt Bay becoming a place where families and school groups could visit. He set about working with the local community to stop companies from dumping pollution into the wetlands. He began overseeing the construction of a new visitor center, and perhaps most importantly, he got his staff to buy into his vision. Although Richard lost his life before he was able to see his plans completed, he had instilled all of his passion in the other rangers at Humboldt Bay. And today, the wetlands are free of pollution, billboards have been removed from the park grounds, and the Richard J. Guadagno headquarters and visitor center provide a place for children and their parents to learn about the surrounding environment. Richard's spirit and his love for our natural resources is evident even 20 years after his death. When we talk about September 11th, we often hear the phrases never forget and always remember. And while we never want to forget what happened on that day, I'd like to encourage you to always remember who Richard was before September 11th. To me, Richard Guadagno lived his life in a way that makes it impossible for him to be forgotten. His story didn't end on September 11th. It's still all around us, whether at Humboldt Bay or at this tiny little piece of rural Pennsylvania. And we can look everywhere that there's a beautiful landscape, and we can remember Richard. And with that said, I want to end by going one step farther and saying that Richard Guadagno's life of passion and love for learning is worth more than just remembering. It's a life that is worth emulating. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, for those wonderful remarks. Next, I would like to introduce Stanley Knick, President of the Board of Commissioners for the Pennsylvania Game Commission.
Good morning. Thank you for the introduction. I am honored and humbled to join you all here on this September morning as we rededicate State Game Lands 93 to the heroic passengers and crew members of the United Airlines Flight 93. The Pennsylvania Game Commission will never forget the lives lost in the terror attacks which occurred 20 years ago tomorrow on September 11th, 2001, the deadliest attack on American soil by a foreign entity. The Game Commission is the state's wildlife agency responsible for managing and protecting wildlife and their habitat while promoting hunting and trapping for current and future generations. Our agency manages nearly 2 million acres of state game lands across the state to provide quality opportunities for wildlife and hunters. But the hundreds of acres surrounding us here on this state game lands 93 are unlike any other. It is scarred and a special place. This land is not only preserved, the place where history occurred, but it helps to tell a story of that day. And most importantly, it honors the individuals whose ultimate sacrifice saved an untold number of lives. Visitors of this State Game Lands 93 from today forward will always be reminded of the 40 brave men and women aboard United Airlines 93 who gave their lives to defend of our nation nearly 20 years ago. At this time, it is my honor to introduce Pennsylvania Game Commission Executive Director Brian Burhans. Thank you very much. God bless America.
Thank you, Stan, and good morning, everyone. It's such an honor, I can't tell you, to join all of you here this morning. On behalf of the Pennsylvania Game Commission, your state wildlife agency, we join the entire nation in remembering the 3,000 lives lost on the morning of September 11th, 2001. Our hearts are with every single person who lost a family member, a friend, a colleague, or on that tragic day. Today, we are here at State Game Lands 93. We are humbled and we are honored to eternally remember the 40 passengers of United Flight 93. If you are unfamiliar with the area, we are located directly across from the main entrance to the National Park Service Flight 93 area. This is right along the flight path of Flight 93. State Game Lands 93 is open to the public, provides hunting and recreational opportunities, and also provides quality wildlife habitat. And it also preserves the sacred land surrounding the Flight 93 National Memorial, eternally ensuring that the natural setting and views around the memorial will always be protected. Pennsylvania Game Commission Land Management Supervisor Matthew Lucas will be sharing more about the game lands in a few minutes. Today we are joined here to rededicate this special land to the heroic passengers and crew members of United Airlines Flight 93 in conjunction with the anniversary of the attacks which occurred 20 years ago on September 11th, 2001. It's hard to fathom that 20 years have gone by. 20 years has passed, and yet the events of that day remain so vivid in our minds. An initial dedication of the state game lands occurred on July 15, 2010, and a memorial stone and sign were placed in memory of the passengers and crew members of Flight 93 near the parking area that day. The wetland area right here behind me was dedicated in honor of U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service biologist and law enforcement officer Richard Guadagno. Daniel Reed did an amazing job sharing Richard's story, and we are honored to welcome his father, Jerry, sister Lori, along with many of Richard's loved ones here to Game Lands 93 this morning. On behalf of the Pennsylvania Game Commission, we are proud to honor and to remember Richard's life and work in protecting wildlife all across the United States. Richard was a federal law enforcement officer and took his role in wildlife protection very seriously, which is a large focus of our agency. Due to Richard's lifelong passion and commitment to wildlife conservation, the agency constructed a special memorial for him on the game lands, including the Guadagno Trail. Richard liked birds, which is why the Game Commission specifically created the wetlands area near the memorial. We have a sunflower wreath placed by the stone today, and those were one of his favorite flowers. Another one of Richard's favorite things was his beloved German Shepherd Raven, who accompanied him on many outdoor adventures and is in so many of the photos. And I got to see a picture of Raven today on the pin. At today's rededication, our goal is to remember and honor the lives lost on that day. To do that, we are rededicating the following items in the memorial area to preserve the memory and share the Flight 93 story with visitors. These include a new Memorial Game Lands 93 sign, 2 new stone engraved memorial benches, one in honor of the 40 passengers and crew members, and one in honor of Richard Guadagno. Informational kiosks in the bulletin boards with details about the story of Flight 93, including the names of all 40 men and women on board. Information about the Flight 93 National Memorial, the history of the State Game Lands 93 dedication, information about wildlife memorial for Richard Guadagno, and a photo with him and Raven. Details about how Game Commission restored more than 700 acres of wildlife habitat here and what species are thriving in the area. The bulletin board has a nice roof over the top to protect it from weather, and the benches are attached, and the structure was built by Eagle Scout Jared Kissinger of Trafford, Pennsylvania, and his fellow scouts and community volunteers before the 2010 dedication. I encourage everyone to make it a point to stop here and visit the special memorial, as well as the National Flight 93 Memorial across the road. September 11th, 2001 started out as any ordinary Tuesday. I know I remember it well. A sign at the Flight 93 National Memorial near the crash site reminds us of that sentiment as it reads, "A common field one day, a field of honor forever." A common field one day, a field of honor forever. The common day turned tragic at 8:46 when American Airlines Flight 11 hit the North Tower of the World Trade Center in New York City. 18 minutes later, United Airlines Flight 175 hit the South Tower. At 9:45, American Airlines Flight 77 crashed into the west side of the Pentagon in Arlington, Virginia. And at 10:03, Flight 93 crashed into the field across the road. The date marks one of America's darkest days. Everyone who lived through it will never forget exactly where they were and when they learned about the attacks occurring. Vivid, terrifying memories from 20 years ago still replay in our minds. We all have a story from where we were on that ordinary turned tragic day, but many of us don't know the stories of those on board. For those on Flight 93, 7 crew members were preparing for an early nonstop flight out of Newark, New Jersey. 31 passengers were traveling across the country to San Francisco, California for ordinary reasons. All 40 people on board had a life, a story, a legacy, and loved ones to share. They had future dreams, they had plans that were lost on that day. I encourage everyone to learn their stories and keep them in your heart, today, tomorrow, and always. As we reflect on the lives lost, let us also remember the heroic efforts of those that chose to fight that day. While preparing for my remarks, I became immersed in learning about the lives and background of those on board Flight 93. On that morning, Richard Guadagno was flying back to California after visiting his family in New Jersey to celebrate his grandmother's 100th birthday. When his father dropped him off at the airport for his flight, Richard invited him to come see him and Raven at his new home in Northern California near Humboldt Bay National Wildlife Refuge, where he was working. Louis Nackey II was on a one-day last-minute business trip that took him away from his wife and their new home under construction located in New Hope, Pennsylvania. United Airlines captain Jason Dahl rearranged his flight schedule that day so he could take his wife to London for their upcoming 5th wedding anniversary. He was carrying a small box of rocks on that day, a long-ago gift from his son, which he always had with him. Diora Bodley was the youngest person on board. She was flying home after visiting friends. She was 20 years old and a junior at Santa Clara University. William Cashman loved the outdoors and was traveling with his longtime friend Patrick Driscoll to go hiking in Yosemite National Park. Husband and wife, Donald and Jean Peterson, were also traveling to Yosemite National Park for a vacation with family. Patricia Cushing and Jane Folger were friends and sister-in-laws who were traveling to San Francisco for the first time, a trip they had been planning for months. Toshiya Kugi was 20 years old from Osaka, Japan. He wanted to become proficient in English and earn a master's degree in engineering from an American university. He was on a 2-week vacation to the United States where he visited Niagara Falls and the Statue of Liberty. The flight was the first leg of his trip home to Japan. Lauren Catuzzi Grandocolis was returning home from her grandmother's funeral in New Jersey to her home in California. She was working on writing a book to inspire women to follow their dreams. She and her husband were expecting their first child. Her sisters completed and published the book titled You Can Do It, a Merit Badge Handbook for Grown-Up Girls. United Airlines flight attendant Sandy Bradshaw always wanted to be a flight attendant. At the time, she was only traveling a couple trips per month and allowed her more time to be at home with her young family. Sandy called United Airlines to report the emergency and described the terrorist, then called her husband and told her she and others were boiling water in preparation for throwing that on the hijackers. On the morning of the attacks, one of the things that was different for those on board Flight 93 was that they were able to use airphones to call their loved ones. And by doing so, they shockingly learned about the hijacked planes that were already crashed, realizing that Flight 93 was part of a larger attack. These passengers took a vote and decided to fight back against the radical Islamic terrorists that had seized control of the aircraft. They charged the cockpit and acted in the face of pure and absolute evil. Their courage and determination in the face of the unthinkable danger is extraordinary, to say the least. It was later determined that the terrorists on board Flight 93 were targeting the heart of the American democracy, Washington, D.C., our nation's capital. The intended target was most likely the United States Capitol, where legislators were currently in session. From where we are, Washington, D.C. is only about a 20-minute flight. Because of the unity, the courage, and the bravery of those on board Flight 93, it was the only plane not to make it to the terrorist intended target that day. Their sacrifice saved an untold number of lives. The memorial stone that was placed near the wetlands habitat on our game lands is engraved with the following quote from President Calvin Coolidge. "No person was ever honored for what he received. Honor has been the reward for what he gave." These 40 men and women gave everything that day. All their love, their fight, and ultimately, they lost their lives. That's why we're here gathered today. That's why ceremonies like this are taking place this week all across the nation. That's why Congress passed the Flight 93 Memorial Act in 2002 and constructed the National Memorial. That's why we share the stories of those that we lost that day, so their lives can always be remembered. As a nation, we must never forget the lives of those 40 men and women on board Flight 93. They are all true American heroes, and their deeds on that morning will outlive us all. On that day of the attacks, Pennsylvania Game Commission crews were among some of the first to respond to the crash here on the other side of Route 30. More than 400 first responders were lost in attacks across America that day. We remember each and every one of them. Before I conclude, I want to thank all the members of the United States military, our first responders, our law enforcement professionals, and our firefighters who sacrificed a great deal to keep our country and our state and our communities safe and secure. More than 7,000 military heroes have lost their lives in the last 20 years since the attacks on September 11th. More than 6 million Americans enlisted in our armed services since that time. No words can ever convey the immense gratitude for the work and sacrifice of these brave men and women. Again, I want to thank everybody for being here today, and to those that are watching online today. It is now my privilege to introduce Matthew Lucas, Pennsylvania Game Commission Land Management Supervisor, who will share more about the game lands where we're at today and how it came to be. The Pennsylvania Game Commission is honored to protect and maintain State Game Lands 93 for current and future generations. We are humbled to rededicate these lands and honor the heroes of Flight 93. Thank you, and God bless America.
Good morning. The story of how this area became State Game Lands 93 is a unique but also familiar story. Like any land acquisition, it started with an idea and, most importantly, motivated employees. In this case, the idea was securing a buffer around the crash site to protect it from development and provide continued recreational opportunities. The employees who spearheaded the effort at the time were Barry Safuto, who served as land management supervisor for the Southwest region, and the habitat management crew consisting of Bob Turner and Greg Urban, who did the work on the ground along with a Pennsylvania Conservation Corps crew led by Foreman Harold Kilkenauer. Safuto served as a member of the Flight 93 National Memorial Task Force. The work began in 2002 as a way to complement the National Park Service's efforts to protect the area. Over the next 8 years, with Safuto's oversight and efforts, the PGC received donations of several tracts from Waste Management, by way of the Wildlife for Everyone Endowment Foundation, Consol Energy, and the families of Flight 93. The PGC also used advance royalties as part of a lease with Amfire Mining Company to purchase 3 parcels. Because there was already a State Game Lands 93 in Clearfield County, the PGC redesignated that area as State Game Lands 331, which allowed these tracts to be named after United Flight 93. A final tract that was added was a 4-acre parcel that was acquired by way of the Conservation Fund through donations by Williams Natural Gas. It contained a house that had fallen into disrepair, which was along the entrance next to Route 30. This piece was especially important due to interest from various entities who were looking to establish businesses there. In turn, Waste Management tore down the house, and the tract was transformed into a herbaceous opening that is planted with sunflowers and various wildflowers to create a pollinator field. To date, State Game Lands 93 is made up of 724 acres. About 1/3 of this area consists of reclaimed surface mine. When acquired, the previously mined area consisted of mainly fescue grasses with patches of barren ground that had little to no value for wildlife habitat. The Southwest Region Habitat Management staff were able to use Pittman-Robertson funds to begin the conversion of this area into a more wildlife-favorable grassland habitat by planting a warm season grass and native forage mix to provide better habitat for wildlife. Additionally, several old mine sediment basins were converted into more wildlife-friendly shallow wetland complexes by the Somerset County Habitat Management Group. The Pennsylvania Conservation Corp assisted with the development of this game land by creating the large welcome sign using stones and wood found in Somerset County and building several bridges to aid the public with crossing several of the wetland complexes. In addition to the initial revegetation efforts of the grassland habitat, several other habitat management activities have occurred to improve the habitat in the area. A border edge cut along the grass and forest border created a better habitat transition zone. Several small non-commercial forest cuts were completed to create more early successional habitat, and multiple artificial nest boxes were installed for barn owls, wood ducks, mallards, and kestrels. The use of prescribed fire on the grassland area maintains and revitalizes the grassland habitat. The habitat crew controls invasive species in wetland complexes, and they have planted apple trees to create additional food sources. Through these habitat efforts, in just a few short years, this once mostly barren former mine site has been transformed into a tremendous habitat area that is not only a hunting destination of many sportsmen for a wide variety of game species, but also a place where many come to simply enjoy nature. In addition to the great habitat improvements efforts the Somerset County Habitat Management Crew have completed, they also continue regular maintenance and improvements on the memorial site and memorial trails of this game land, since this is one of the main reasons Game Land 93 was established. There's little doubt that having this state game land named after United Flight 93 takes on a special meaning. Driving past this memorial, one cannot help being motivated to carry on the efforts to create and manage good habitat in the memory of those who lost their lives that day, especially Richard Guadagno, who shared our passion in managing and protecting wildlife and their habitats. When we called on our Somerset Habitat Management Crew and land manager Travis Anderson with upgrading the memorial, they jumped into action. They made the improvements as requested, doing so with enthusiasm and pride. Just as wetlands are a critical habitat component for all wildlife species, so too was Richard, a critical component in wildlife conservation in many people's lives. It's truly an honor to have a memorial on Game Land 93 in honor of him, all his dedication to conservation, and his dedication to our country. Thank you.
Could everyone please rise for the retiring of the colors by the Pennsylvania Game Commission Ceremonial Unit.
Detail. Hold. Present. Arms. Order. Arms. Ready. Cut. Recover. Colors.
Detail. Left. Peace.
Ready. Cut.
Forward. March.
Right. Face. Forward. March.
Please be seated. Before we dismiss, I would like to thank everyone for attending today's ceremony, especially the Guadagno family. Also, I would like to send a special thank you to Land Management Officer Travis Anderson, Food and Cover Crew Foreman Robert Turner, Food and Cover Crew Maintenance Workers Greg Urban, Paul Will, and Andrew Hay for the incredible job of preparing the site for today's events. Could you four please stand for me? We also would like to thank the National Park Service for their help in organizing today's events. Without them, the information would not be presented. We would not have as much information. So thank you very much for your help in organizing today's events. This concludes our ceremonies. Please remain seated for the dismissal instructions after a brief pause. Thank you.